Someone said, how do you heal from a sexual wound and learn to trust yourself and another so that your sex drive is no longer stifled? Over the years, as I've worked with like victims of sexual trauma, I think the biggest and the most powerful way I have come to connect with their healing is about them recognizing the person they were when they had gone through the trauma, instead of necessarily just focusing on who they are right now, because the attachment to that wounded version of them is what's keeping them in the place that they're in, right? And that is a natural defense mechanism of the ego, is to basically like want to now just protect the self because we're afraid of what's going to happen. But if you were to break it down in the present moment, you may not attract any of those situations at all. You may not be in that moment at all, but you still be closed up. Why? Because you're reliving that past story. So the best way that I've discovered in working with individuals with sexual trauma is to go back to that past version of you and to reparent and love that past version of you. What that looks like, just like I said to Evandia, is it looks like for her in that moment when she was alone, it's like picking up her little child and saying, let's do these things together. For you in that past moment, if you can visualize or see yourself around that time, it's going to that little inner child, picking them up, holding them and keeping them safe, the one thing they wish they had in that moment, and taking them away from that moment. What you're doing is you're not denying your past, but you're changing how you view your past. When you now go back and you pick up that inner child and you take her away and you keep her safe and you protect her and you put her on your lap or put him on your lap and you soothe them and you say, you are so fucking valuable. I'm never going to let anyone touch you. I'm never going to let anyone hurt you. I'm never going to let anyone get to you like that. What you're doing now is you're building a sense of more self-belief within this inner child. You're building this sense of self-love, belief, trust within this inner child now, that someone is looking out for them. Someone is loving them. Someone is choosing them and going to protect them. Because the reason, here's what's so crazy about people who experience their experiences of people who have gone through sexual trauma, is it's not just the trauma itself, it is what happened after they experienced the trauma. If you were to rewind and look at almost every one of the victims in that moment, they did not have a safe space where they could completely be able to talk about what they went through, be validated, recognized, feel loved, protected, and safe. In fact, most of them had to shut it up, swallow it, weren't believed, had to shame themselves, judge themselves, criticize their own body for what they've gone through, and shame themselves. And so they're now sitting with all of this energy that they're holding on to in this backpack around their trauma. And this backpack is on their shoulders even when they don't see it. And so every time they go into a relationship, when they're trying to get into a space of like sexual connection with someone, the first thing that someone may feel is like, holy shit, this backpack's weighing on them, right? So they're like, oh my God, this might happen in the same way again. Or if they even find a person who represents something similar, their ego will make them believe it's going to happen in this way again. And so now they live in this locked up or protected world because they haven't created safety, not for them in the present moment, for the same version of them that's hurting from the past. And so it's very difficult, especially for victims of sexual trauma, to go back to that place because that place was filled with such incredible pain. But it is also so incredibly important for them to go back to that moment. One thing I've noticed, I was with a girl actually many years ago who had experienced sexual trauma in her childhood. And I noticed when we were together, she unconsciously was looking for me to prove to her that this sexual experience, this moment, or a connection would be dangerous for her. And so her emotions would run up and down. Now, a lot of men or people who aren't able to hold space for it will reject it, push it back, being like, why the fuck are you acting so crazy? But I'd already done the inner work to recognize that she was experiencing some great discomfort, where part of her wanted this sexual connection so deeply, but part of her, which was driven by the ego, was like, it's going to turn out bad, I know it. And so it keeps saying that. Like we say that in different ways though, right? It doesn't only have to be around a sexual experience. We say that around rejection. We say that around abandonment. If we have a massive abandonment wound, when we get into a relationship, we'll get in one foot out the door and say, I know this person's going to abandon me. So I'm either going to sabotage the relationship. I'm going to push them to a point where they abandon me. I'm going to do any of that so that I can prove that to myself all the way true. So the wounds in our subconscious are what will constantly reproduce the pattern. As difficult and as challenging as the sound, I wish I had a better way to say it, but it's around especially victims of abuse, childhood sexual abuse, emotional abuse, children of alcoholics. I've met so many victims when I work one-on-one of alcohol abuse who kept getting into the same pattern with men again and unconsciously defending them. Why? Because it reminded them of a father figure or someone in their life who they wanted to stop, but couldn't put them in danger because they were so closely associated and related with that person. So they unconsciously would like put themselves in that danger instead of that other person. So it has to go back to that version of you, which is extremely uncomfortable. But that's why there are containers like the Gauntlet and other spaces created where you can feel safe to have these discussions, go dive deep, to actually do that reparenting. And this time to come across or come out with a different outcome, to come out with a different story, to come out with a different sense of being, because here's the hardest but the most ultimate truth. You are living a life which is actually a reproduction of a life that you lived for the first 18 years of your being, because that's when your subconscious actually was formed. Your subconscious was formed when your conscious mind wasn't fully created. So it was like kind of that balance. And so as a kid, you didn't have a conscious mind, which is why legally, actually, factually, you are capable of being an adult and making rational decisions. And governments have come across this standard when you're around 18, because it takes that many years for your forebrain to develop for you to create logical reasoning. Until that point, your mind is like a fucking sponge. So especially the younger that you are, the subconscious is super fucking active. It's absorbing everything, which is why children are creative. Children don't make judgments, they're so authentic. But conditioning is what puts them in that state. So if we don't go back to working with a lot of those experiences and healing a lot of those experiences from then, the subconscious is still going to rule us from what its belief systems are. So it's very important for us to go back to the past. But here's one last piece I'll say. You can only manifest your future and whatever you want from where you are right now. But the bigger question you have to ask yourself is, where are you right now? If right now you are still attached to your wounds of your past, to your stories of your past, to your experiences of your past, then your future will be a repetition of your past. You see? Because you can only manifest from here. So if you want to change the future you manifest, you must first learn to heal the wounds of that past and how it like shows up for you right now. And that's why, just as we talked about like with Evandia, such a beautiful question to keep coming back to. The more you feel with self-worth right now by healing your inner child and that little girl or that little boy, that little child that lived inside you, the next time someone comes and asks you and says, hey, can you like solve this thing for me or help me out here so that you can prove to me that you really like are valuable to me, you'll be like, no, I know I'm valuable as I am. Thank you very much. So you'll say no. If you keep saying no for 21 days, not necessarily 21 days, but continuously as you're tested, you will even stop attracting those tests. Because why should you have a test if you're always going to pass it, right? If you're always going to like ace it. So you'll evolve from that point. You'll evolve to maybe a higher, better quality test or challenge or whatever. But you must work first on releasing the chains of the past, especially with a question like that, if you want to be able to heal, create a life in the future. And that revolves around reparenting that inner child, creating safety for her, making her feel so loved and validated, protecting her. Going back to that instance, here's another difficult thing. The ego will want you to go back and punish the other person. And that's so easy to justify again, right? Like if you want to tell me they deserve to be punished for what they did, yeah, it's so easy for me to have to say yes, because that'll make your ego feel better in the moment. But that's the worst thing to do, because that's another reason your ego is going to stay attached to them. And until they receive that punishment, you will feel like your life is like still laser focused on them. You'll forget about you and that little child who needs to be picked up, loved, and cared for unconditionally and taken away from that fucking situation. So always take the focus back on you. The inner child, pick them up, love them, soothe them, protect them. Do the opposite of what they experienced in that moment. That's what I always do for myself in my inner child meditations almost every morning. If I have a traumatic experience, an experience about around abandonment, rejection, past wounds, sexual, like trauma, physical trauma, anything, I'll do the opposite. So I'll show up for my inner child with love and safety and protection. If I was unsafe and I was physically assaulted, I'd show up with show up with like keeping them like close and safe and like hugging them and soothing them and making them feel protected. It's another way you can highlight what Christina was talking about, creating that internal safety, right? It all comes from the inner child. If you feel rejected or abandoned, going back to that same child or that past version of you, could have even been 5 years ago, going back to that same 5 years ago version of you, which is still younger than you, going there, soothing them, rubbing them and saying, I will never leave you. The one person who will never leave you on this planet is me. I will always fucking be here for you. If we have no money, if we have no nothing, I will be here for you, but I know we will have it all. You do that, how you show up in the present starts to change drastically. Hey, and welcome to the Inner Yats YouTube page. If you like our content, make sure you click the like and the subscribe button so that you get more of these amazing videos that keep coming your way.